How can you make your marriage more equitable? My guest today is a content creator that addresses this topic on social media. Paige Connell is the head of operations of a technology company. She's a mother of four and a popular influencer on socials under her handle. She is a page turner. We talk about equity as parents, the high cost of daycare, how to make content if you're an aspiring content creator, and a lot more. I'm Anthony Francis. This is the Successful Working Parents podcast, where we learn from busy working parents how they're able to balance it all and still thrive. Thank you for listening. On to the show. Welcome back to the Successful Working Parents podcast, the podcast where we talk to successful working parents, title still pending. My guest today, she is the head of operations as well as a content creator. She's a mother of four. Ladies and gentlemen, Paige Connell. Paige, welcome to the show.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. So usually we kick off with a little background on your career if you'd share that.
Yeah, happy to. I went to school for broadcast journalism. So my career actually started out in Los Angeles. I worked on like TV shows and podcasts and radio, but I was making no money and I was like 22, 23 years old and ended up moving, back home. I'm from the Boston area and ended up in a sales role. Which I feel like everybody ends up in a sales role, right, at some point in their career.
Well, I did. If you don't know what you're doing, I feel like that's usually where you end up.
Yeah. So I ended up in a sales role, but it was a startup and I kind of grew within the organization and ended up kind of evolving my career there. And I was with that company for 7 years, which I feel like is a long time these days. And
Sure.
yeah, grew our teams, grew our business, and eventually transitioned into an additional startup after that, where I'm the head of operations. And so I oversee shipping and logistics and HR and customer success. We're a startup, so I do a lot of different things, which is exciting, but also a lot, to balance every single day across the brand. But yeah, my career has kind of taken different turns, but always been working in really small businesses, more like startup environment.
Yeah. Well, in addition to that and having four kids, you also moonlight as a content creator, as
I
a really,
do.
really popular one as well. So tell us a little bit more about how that started and what the focus is there.
Yeah, it started because of work, because we use TikTok at work for marketing. We're
Okay.
retail and apparel. So we were seeing really interesting sales growth from that as a channel. And so I was like, oh, I used to dabble in on-air stuff. Let me kind of start posting some videos just for fun, check out TikTok as a creator. And I was really just hoping to learn about it. I wasn't really expecting to do well on the platform.
Sure.
But my videos started to resonate specifically with working millennial moms. And I just continued to post and I've grown since then and, have expanded. I was really only on TikTok because I didn't really want people to find me. And now, I'm kind of everywhere, which is really fun. And it's been great to connect with other parents about what it's like these days to manage, childcare, your career, your well-being, your marriage, the whole nine.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited to talk to you today. One of the things that you talk a lot about is the equity in
Mm-hmm.
in a in a partnership as parents. And I'm proud to say that me and my wife have a really great split and a pretty non-traditional in that I assume a lot of the traditional wife roles, really. Like I'm like
Sure.
the house husband in a lot of ways. And so, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you came to start making content about that. Was this something that you noticed was not going well in your own life, or was it something that you felt like you had kind of figured out and saw other people struggling with?
Yeah, no, it was definitely from a personal experience. I've been with my husband since we were 16. We've been together a very long time. And we
Wow.
had, so we had spent a lot of our lives together and knew how to run a home together. But when we had kids, it was about 6 months before the pandemic started. And our older two are adopted and they moved in with us. They were in foster care, right? So we went from no kids to two kids very quickly. And they were 1 and 2, which is like a whole vibe, right? Toddlers,
Sure.
and like really threw us in there. And the pandemic hit, and we went from both being working parents who had daycare for our kids to me working at home, taking care of the children. I was pregnant at the time, and he had a job where he still worked outside the house. And he's a first responder, so he just never, he never stayed home. He was always gone. And so everything became my responsibility really fast, right? The childcare, the home, everything was mine because I was physically there. And we were in it, the thick of it for 2 to 3 years. And when we came out on the other side, we had just had our fourth baby. I think I just opened my eyes one day and was like, what happened? How did we get here? Why am I doing everything by myself? my husband is a very physically present dad, right? Like he was always here for dinner and bath time and kids sports and stuff, but he wasn't responsible for anything. It was my job to delegate and tell him what to do and when to do it on all of that. And so, my personal experience led me to trying to figure out how to make this work in my marriage. And then from sharing my experience online, I've had the great opportunity of connecting with so many other women and men who've gone through it as well, and being able to kind of, my main goal is to just articulate what it feels like or articulate what happens, not necessarily to give any individual the exact path out because it's different for every family. I can't give everybody a blueprint, but at least if we can put words to it and understand it a little bit better, we can hopefully mitigate this happening if it's not what you want, right? And for some people, this dynamic works. I think for the majority of us in dual income homes, it doesn't.
Yeah. So that's an interesting point. So do you feel like the awareness and the education is really the big first step in changing that narrative? I understand that probably every situation is a little bit different, but what can be done to actually bring about some change there?
Yeah, I think it's really important to acknowledge it exists first and foremost, right? Be able to see it, talk about it, and from there you can hopefully make changes, right? For us, it was important for me to say, hey, I know it feels like you're always here and you're always doing stuff. He'd be like, I'm a great dad. I'm always here. What else do you want? And I'm like, hey,
Yeah.
what I would like is for you to know which vitamin which kid gets. And I would like for you to know their doctor's name. And I would like for you to know what time pickup is and when pizza day is. Like, I don't want to be the only person to know all of these things for 4 kids while also working full time. Right.
Yeah.
And even if I wasn't working full time, it's still a lot. And so for me, it was being able to say, hey, let's put it on paper. We actually used a spreadsheet and we had read Fair Play and did a version of the Fair Play game. But I put it on a spreadsheet and it was like my name was next to all the things that I do and manage in our home, and his name was next to his. And I had like 65 and he had 15. And I was like, does this feel equitable? And, that is not what they want you to do in Fair Play. They don't want you to be like, look at how much I do. But for us, it was helpful. He was able to say like, okay, like I can see why this is overwhelming.
Yeah.
What can we start to take off your plate and what does that look like? And I always like to tell people it's hard. It takes work. It takes time. It is not an overnight solution. Like you have to constantly be talking about it and working on it until you get to the place where it's just how you live, right? And once you get there, it's a lot easier, but it's hard to get to that place of equity.
But so should we take that list of 80 things and you take 40 and he takes 40, or like what does an equitable split actually look like?
I don't think there is one version of it, right? I don't think there is, because I think in my marriage, my husband works, he's a blue collar guy. He works a ton of overtime. He works a lot of overnights and all these things. And so our lives can't be an equal 50-50 split. They just are. It's not possible because he's not even here 50% of the time, right? And so the question then becomes, okay, then what does equity look like for us? How do we prioritize that? How do we make that work? And for us, I'd still say it's probably like a 70-30 split. Like I definitely carry the bulk of the kids in the home. By nature, the fact that I'm here physically, right? He leaves the house before I even wake up. So I do mornings by myself. And so it's never going to be 50-50 for us. I think the important thing to do is to acknowledge that everyone's time is important and valuable, right? And that paid time isn't the only valuable time, right? Oftentimes you'll hear like, oh, well, I make all the money and I work 10 hours a day. And it's like, great, but you're working 10 hours a day and so are they, right? Working at home with kids is just as hard. It's all work. We're all working. So let's place value on both of those things and treat them similar to one another when appropriate.
Yeah. I mean, I got to say, I've had experience with being the full-time caregiver just on paternity leave. And right now I have a few weeks off. I'm starting a new job soon. So,
nice.
And my wife is a principal of a high school. So she's gone all day.
Yeah.
It's pretty exhausting actually.
I can only imagine. Yeah.
But I mean, no, but to take care of, to be home all day, like it's not like that easy, right? To just be home all day taking care of kids. I think when I was younger, I had this like romantic idea of being a stay-at-home dad, and it would be like somehow easier. It's really not that easy. So I definitely get that the split. But yeah, so for our situation, the reason why I was asking like what could be done about it is because I feel like it just happened to be my personality type, where I'm like pretty anal and type A. Like I like to do the laundry and cook and clean.
Yep.
And then it just works out well that we have a pretty even split, because I do a lot of those things and my wife just naturally does a lot of child things, right? although I do as well. So I feel like it's given us an even split fairly naturally because she's at work all day and I have more flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like if it's not the way people naturally drift, it would be hard to really make a conscious change.
Totally. And I think so much of this is not really about our individual failures, right? It's not about us as individuals. It's about society as a whole, right? Like, what have you been told about being a dad? Or what have you been told about being a partner? What did you see from your dad? What did you see from your mom? And that influences us so much more than we probably like to acknowledge, right? At the end of the day, I do things because it's either what I saw or the opposite of what I saw, right? A lot of times we're like, I'm not doing what they did. And so this is what I'm going to try. I think the biggest mistake we all make is not talking about it before we're in it, right? And so before you have kids, I've just talked about this and I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but with daycare or childcare, kids are sick nonstop, right? Who's taking
Oh
sick
yeah.
time? How are you
Yeah.
balancing that? When is it you and when is it him? And how do you have those conversations before it starts happening? Because when it's already happening, it tends to just default to someone. And then that's where kind of the resentment and frustration grows. So I think the biggest thing we can do to avoid things like this is to talk about them. Just acknowledge that there needs to be a division of labor that works for both people and for the family, and then be able to be flexible to the needs of your family, because you don't know, what your job's going to be or childcare situation or the needs of your child. And so things are always changing, but at least if you're talking about them, it's a little easier to combat.
So what do you think it means to be a good dad and partner in 2024?
Mm-hmm.
Has that role genuinely changed? Do you agree there was a time when it was just the man's responsibility to be the provider and be less involved, and it should change now with the way
Yeah.
society is evolving?
Yeah, I think the expectations are different, right? I think it used to be that men viewed themselves as a provider and a protector, and that's also how women viewed men, right? But partially our economy can't support single income homes anymore. Most people are not in a single income home, but
Tell me about it. Yeah.
yeah, even if they are, right, the expectations are different. Women are expecting their partners to be active participants in the home. They are expecting their partners to want to be good dads. And by good dads, it's a different for everyone, but for me, I think being an active parent, right, no matter how much money you make, no matter how powered your job is, I don't think any of those things ever trump involvement in your child's life, right? Like, you can't trade money for parenthood, right? You chose to be a parent. You should parent your children, whether or not you make a ton of money, whether or not you work long hours. And I think for me, that's, you know, the bare bones of it is like, do you participate in changing their diapers or their schedule? Do you feed them? Do you help with overnights? Do you know their teacher's name? Would you be able to punch in the code at the daycare center to get in the door? Like, that sounds crazy, but like, there are dads out there who don't know those things and don't understand them. And I think women are no longer in 2024 like accepting that as an acceptable kind of participation level from men. And so they want men to be just as involved and in tune with their kids as they are, right? Because also most of these women are out working too. They're like, so I go to work every single day, but I still need to change most of the diapers and buy the teacher gifts at holidays, etc. I want my partner to be in it with me.
Yeah. Fellas, if you're listening to this and you don't know the code to your kid's daycare, come on.
Yeah.
Sharpen up.
Have you seen the videos? There's videos where ER doctors are like, yeah, so many dads don't know their kid's date of birth and it's bad. And I'm like,
That's
that's
crazy.
crazy. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. No, like I said, I know all that stuff. I feel like
Of
it's
course.
just my anal nature that drives me to. But yeah, I could see it being a huge challenge for us if I wasn't really into that. Speaking of
Yeah.
daycare, it's pretty expensive.
Super
I know
expensive.
you talk about that a lot as well. So I live in Manhattan, by the way. So you live in Boston or you live outside of Boston?
Outside of Boston. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I mean it's probably if just as expensive, if not more expensive here as it is there.
Yeah.
I mean, other than just lamenting it, like, is there anything to be done about it, or is it more again just bringing back the narrative of both parents probably have to work, and this is one of the reasons why, and so we need to change the way we think about parenting.
Yeah. I think about the cost of childcare in kind of like two ways, right? There's the fact that most developed countries have parental leave for parents, right? Meaning they don't
Yeah.
need to take advantage of childcare as early. Here in the US, kids can go to daycare centers as young as 6 weeks old sometimes, which is mind boggling, right? But I only got 8 weeks of leave with my first three. And so, right, like 8 weeks, that's what I had. And I didn't, mine did not go to daycare at that age because they couldn't get into daycare anyways. They were on a wait list for like 2 years. And so
Yeah.
I think there's a couple of things. There is, because the pandemic, it exacerbated the childcare crisis that exists. There's a lack of funding, there's a lack of infrastructure, and just like government support for childcare that exists in many other countries. And we just don't have that here. And we place the burden of the cost on the individual, like childcare centers and parents, right? And childcare centers, the the P&Ls don't really make sense if you look at them. They like don't, there's like no real great way to make a profit, which sounds crazy to people because we're paying so much, but the people who work in them make so little, which is also a huge problem, right? So I think there's something to be said about childcare as an industry and the fact that it probably shouldn't be an industry, right? It should be an infrastructure, a support system that exists for families that, we could all kind of contribute to. That is it feels like a pipe dream in our country, but there is things to be done and advocacy that can take place and policies that can change. But when it comes to like our individual homes, right? Oftentimes people will say, they'll talk about childcare in the context of a woman's salary. They'll be like, oh, well, does her salary cover the cost of daycare? And that will be their decision maker of like whether or not a mom should or should not stay home. When in reality, the way I think about it, and I think a lot of couples do as well, is like, okay, our combined salaries pay for this.
Yeah.
And if so, great. If not, what do we need to do? How do we adjust? And if we do take advantage of childcare, my husband and I pay an astronomical amount. I think we pay like 50 to 60K a year for childcare for our 4 kids. And people will often say, yeah, it's crazy. People will be like, well, that doesn't even make sense for you to work. And I'm lucky to make enough money where it does make sense for me to work.
Yeah.
But also, even if I was squeaking by with like 10K after that, I'd probably still work because the long-term benefits to my family financially, the retirement benefits, the insurance benefits, like all of these things that come with having a career are still really important. And so when you take women out of the workforce or men out of the workforce for 5 years to raise kids, it's hugely detrimental to the family finances, not just their finances, but the family's finances as well. And so it's just this really interesting conversation, right? People can't fathom the cost unless they're paying for it themselves. And then they're like, oh my gosh, I never knew it was this expensive.
Yeah. I mean, I am paying for it and I still can't fathom it. It's crazy. I think
Yeah.
it's like part-time is $675 a week for part-time right now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where we are in Massachusetts is one of the highest, like our county is one of the highest costs for childcare in the country, but it's underneath like a San Francisco or a New York City. But it is, I mean, on average in our country, it's, I think like the average is $15,000 a year for a child to attend daycare. And then, in states like Massachusetts, New York, California, it's $20,000 to $25,000 a year. And some people are paying much more than that, right? So it's a huge cost to families, and it's rising faster than groceries and housing. I mean, it's one of the fastest rising costs in our country.
In addition to that, it's in general expensive just to have a kid, as
Totally.
I'm learning.
Yeah.
You have 4 of them, so better than I do. So I feel like this is one of the reasons why it's becoming more and more popular not to have kids or to not have. I mean, 4, you don't see that really anymore in our generation, right? All my friends have stopped at 2 so far, or actually one of them is going for 3. But it's just the exponential cost is there as well. So what do you have to say about that? And is there anything people could do to mitigate that or consider those risks?
Yeah. I support anybody who doesn't want to have kids, because if you're not in it, don't do it. Right. Like, I'm like, if you're half-hearted into being a parent, then it's not probably going to be the most enjoyable experience. But I also think many people want to be parents, but are fearful of not being able to provide for children, right, in this economy. Yeah. And that's really sad for me to know. And, we have 4 kids. Our older 2 are adopted. Our younger 2 are biological. And it's a lot, right? Having more than 2 kids impacts your finances in so many ways that you don't expect. You think about cars. If you're in a place where you need a car, you can't fit 3 car seats in the back of a sedan. it's very difficult. Like you can't do it. Then you need an SUV. And then it's like, okay, well, those are expensive and cars are expensive. And so you think about that and your home and all of these things and the costs add up quickly, right? And everything, there's this narrative around like enriching our children's lives. And there's people in two different camps of like, yeah, your kids should do sports and activities and travel sports and all these things. And that's expensive, right? Like gymnastics for my three daughters for the month. They have an hour-long gymnastics class they each go to. It's $300 for gymnastics. And it's like, that's a
Right.
lot of money, right? But it's
Yeah.
something I want my kids to have. I want them to be able to do gymnastics. They have fun at gymnastics. Like it's fun for me to go with them. And so I think there's some things people do. I know like my sister, my kids are all very young. I have 6 and under are their ages right now, right? So they're very close in age. I've always had like 2 of them in full-time childcare at the same time. And my sister refused to do that. She's like, I can't afford it. And so she had one. And then when that child aged out of childcare, she had her next. And then that one's now aged out and she's having her third. So she has 3, but they're really spread apart. And she's like, yeah, otherwise I just actually cannot afford it. I
Yeah.
can't do it. And so I know a lot of people who plan that way. They family plan that way if possible. I know not everybody has the option to plan like that, but I do know that that's a huge consideration. They're like, oh, and I did it too. When my oldest went to kindergarten, I was like, oh, I can afford the baby, right? Like I can afford
Right.
and it's so terrible to think that way, but we have to.
No, I mean the cost and then just the time commitment. I mean, having one kid has been very interesting, but the idea of there being a little toddler running around while I was taking care of a baby, like it seems pretty daunting.
It is. It can be.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's all relative. I say to everybody, like 1 kid is hard, 2 kids is hard, 4 kids is hard. It's all hard. They're all just like different versions of hard. And I think, but there is something to be said about like young kids too. Like the 2 under 2 phase is not for the faint of heart. It's a lot of work.
No. Wait, so what's
Yeah.
what's the age range for your kids?
My oldest is almost 7, and then we have an almost 6-year-old. They're a year and 2 days apart, so they're very close in age. And then we have a little gap, and we have a 3.5-year-old and then a 2-year-old.
Okay. Yeah, so you got a lot going on over there.
Yeah, we're busy.
Yeah. So what else could people do? Let's say someone's listening to this and they feel like maybe there's not an equal split at home, or they just feel like they're drowning and the partner isn't really chipping in as much. Like what can they do, or what would you want them to know?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's important you know your partner, right? Like I knew when I was angry and I was frustrated with my partner when this was all happening for us, but I'd known him, for 16 years. I was like, I know he doesn't want me bearing this burden by myself. It's just,
Yeah.
this is where we are. And so I think first and foremost, like if you know your partner, right, you're going to know whether or not they're willing and able to change. And I knew mine was. I knew that we'd already gone through many different things together. I was confident that he would put the work in to make it work for us, and to make sure that we were both happy and thriving and doing well. And I also knew he wanted to be a good dad. Like he cares about being a good dad and he cares about being a good partner. And so I think if you have that, it makes these things easier. I definitely talk to a lot of women who don't. And that's really hard, right? I can give you all the tips and tricks and tools, but if you have a partner who doesn't want to do those things, that is really, really hard to navigate. And that's probably a different conversation. Um, but
Some guys are just shitty guys, you
yeah,
know.
exactly. But it can be said for everyone, right? Like some people just
Yeah.
aren't great, and that's just
Yeah.
people in general.
Mhm.
But that's hard for some, right? Where they're like, I want everything to work, but he doesn't want to do anything, and I can't. Nobody can fix that one, right? But if you are in it and you think your partner's in it with you, I think there's tools. There's fair play is something people really like. I enjoyed it. There's critiques of it as well, but I think it's a good jumping off point. So if you haven't read the book Fair Play or done that game, I think it's really helpful just to contextualize how you can create systems. And I think ultimately that's what it is. It sounds awful, but I think for all of us who work in business, we can be like, if we can just make this run like an organization a little bit, right? Like you have your accountabilities, I have my accountabilities. If you drop the ball, everyone's going to know it was on you, right? And like
Yeah.
having that clear split, right? And being able to say like, you own this, I own this. And now let's kind of run at those things together, is really helpful. Like my husband always cooks dinner. That's what he does because I work later and he gets home earlier. And so that's
Yeah.
his thing that he does and I don't have to worry about it. that's a huge burden that's off of me now, because I would get off of work and be like, what do I, like I have 15 minutes to like try to cook a dinner for everybody. And so being able to kind of create systems and organization for your home, I think is really important. Google calendars, like we have Google calendars, we have shared notes apps, we have, an Excel spreadsheet, like we have all the things. Because there's just a lot to manage when you have kids. There's a lot of moving pieces.
Yeah. Again, fellas, start cooking more dinners, all right?
Yeah.
Learn the daycare code. It's not that hard.
No. Yeah, no, right? And I also, this is what I say. If you had to do it before you were married and had kids, then you should still be doing it, right?
Well,
Like,
that's what I was gonna say was you knew your husband for a very long time, but I didn't meet my wife until I was 30, almost 31. And so I was already doing all of those things. So I feel like that probably was one of the reasons why I didn't suddenly need someone to start doing that for me.
Exactly.
And she always had a job where she was, she was going to the school, and I was always remote. So I was like almost doing more of the things around the house. And then when we had kids, it actually made it more equitable naturally, because she had all the motherly things that she was naturally doing. She didn't have to suddenly do all the domestic things as well, right? The house things.
Right. And I think that's probably helpful, right? You guys already had this dynamic that was a little bit more unique, in the sense that, like, I think they're saying more of the remote workers and hybrid workers are women, because they're looking for more flexible jobs to accommodate for their kids. And so having the opposite of that is unique. But I think it exists for a lot of people who have, partners who are nurses or teachers, right? They're always in person. And so it's definitely, I think that can be helpful too. But yeah, you were a grown adult, right? You knew how to do your laundry and to cook food. And getting married doesn't really absolve you of those tasks.
Absolutely. One other thing I want to ask you about, I speak to a lot of content creators about, is putting out content, right? The fear of putting out content. I think not everybody, but a lot of people want to start doing something like that. And I think it's scary to hit the publish button and expose yourself to the criticism and the judgment and just the world. And so curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting place to be. And I think you do have to have somewhat of a thick skin if you're really going to do it. Or, well, I guess if you're not saying anything remotely controversial, maybe not. But even things that are not controversial somehow are on the internet.
People will make fun of you. People will say shit, I think.
Yeah, exactly, for anything. And so, yeah, you have to have a thick skin. I do not. People ask me all the time, like, your comments, Paige, are brutal. How do you deal with it? And I'm transparent. I'm like, I don't even look at them. I don't even look, because I can't, right? Some days I can, and I can laugh and brush it off. And then other days I just don't have the tolerance for it. I can't look at it without feeling bad about it. So I just don't even look. But also I think, it's one of those things where it's like, I've connected with so many amazing people because of this. And the community that can exist online is really beautiful. Obviously there's terrible parts of it, but I think the overwhelming reason why I keep doing it is because of all of the people I get to talk to in my DMs and the comments, and hearing that I've provided any sort of value or even validation for someone is really, like, amazing for me. And that's really all I can hope for. But I would say, if you want to create content, my number one thing is just to create it. Like, don't care about it being perfect. Don't worry about it being, like, highly edited, unless that's like your shtick, right? I think, like, you can just post these days. You can kind of post whatever, and there's somebody who's going to enjoy it usually. And so don't limit yourself. People always ask how I create so much, and I'm like, I don't know. I'll be microwaving my food, waiting for my lunch, and I'm like, I have something to say about X, Y, and Z, and so I just record it in 4 seconds and then post it.
Yeah, and I do think that there's something to be said also for your content is not necessarily polarizing, but you do have something to say, right? You're taking a stance, and that probably has led to your growth as well, right? Because the people that like it really resonates, instead of me just sort of like making content about, like, and not really taking any hard views on anything.
For sure. Yeah. I think the more you're taking hard stances for anything, the more you're going to have people on both sides of that. Right. And it's funny because sometimes I will post something, which you might, like, get a kick out of, but, like, I post a video about, like, my husband's an equal partner, and he cooks dinner and he does bath time. And I said, like, 7 things he does in this video. And I was like, I'm really lucky. I have a great partner who equally participates. And the men in the comments were like, sounds like you're an awful wife. What do you do? And I'm like, what do you mean? What do I do? I listed 7 things, right? And like, you think on the surface, like, this is a positive video. It's like, well, guess not. Who knows?
Do you have some experiences where, like, you're like, oh, this video is going to crush it, and then no one no one really looks at it, and then some are just like random things that you just like throw away items, and then they like really blow up.
Yes. Oh, for sure. Yeah, every time you post something, you kind of hope it'll hit with somebody, right?
Of course.
I never know, especially on TikTok, what will be viral. Like that algorithm is like, I couldn't understand it if I tried. I have no clue as to like what works there and what doesn't. Um, but there have definitely been videos. I had one at the very beginning of this year that I made on a whim. I was in the post office parking lot and I was listening to a podcast and it was just kind of making me mad. And so I made a video about it. I was like, this podcast just like has me thinking about, and it was about successful men who talk all about their success, but don't actually talk about what was happening behind the scenes, like with their kids or their partner or whatever it is. And I really posted it on a whim, like threw it up there. And it was one of those ones that like wouldn't post for like an hour for some reason. I was like, whatever, that'll post whenever it posts. And yeah, it had like close to 5 million views. And I'm like, oh, well, whoops.
Yeah.
Right. And like, you never know. And that's the thing. And that message resonated with a lot of people, men and women. And it was just something I was thinking. And I decided, like I said, to post it on a whim in the parking lot of the post office.
Sure. All right, we're going to move into the final segment called Paige's Advice Corner. So I'm going to ask you for some advice on a few topics, okay?
Okay.
What advice do you have for work-life balance?
Schedule. I think like the more you can schedule your life, the better. And I don't mean like overschedule, but like put blocks in for yourself, book your workouts in advance, like take time off when you need it. Just have everything on your calendar. That's like my key to having work-life balance is actually like scheduling things into my life. I love to do yoga. I put it on my calendar. I book it. I block it off. I have childcare for it or my partner doing it. And like I do that thing. And so for me, that's the only way it works. If I don't schedule it, it doesn't happen. And then I fall to the wayside. Even lunch, which sounds crazy, but like if I don't like block time for lunch, I just don't eat lunch. And then it's like 4 p.m. and I'm shaking.
What advice do you have for self-care?
I think self-care is this term that's really vague and doesn't mean a lot to some people, right? Because is it like a manicure? Is it a massage? Is it yoga? What is it? An hour sitting alone by yourself in the car, right? Like what is self-care for you? So I think the first and foremost thing is I think you should think of things in 2 buckets. Like a shower is not self-care. A shower is something like that you have a right to do when you need to. And then there's like, what is self-care? What really like makes you feel like a human being and fuels your energy and your soul, right? And so my advice is to figure out what that is and try to do more of it as much as you can. For me, it's just getting like dinner with a girlfriend, like just being with another person and socializing is really self-care for me. It excites me and it brings me energy.
What advice do you have for somebody that is about to be a parent but still has a career they want to focus on?
I think it is important to understand what your goals are as a parent and as a professional. I think a lot of advice given to men and women who become parents is that you kind of have to pause or slow down your career. And I don't know that that's always true. I think it just changes and the way you run at things changes and your time changes. And so just being aware of what that change might look like and being willing to prioritize appropriately based on what you want to do at that given time, right? So I've turned down opportunities at work because I'm not in a place to take them on. And I know I wouldn't be able to do them in a way I'd want to. So just being able to have those conversations with yourself.
What advice do you have for an aspiring content creator?
Oh, just post often. Focus on the community more than anything, right? Like the content's important, but don't post just to get likes and follows, right? Like post because you actually have something you care about saying and because you want to connect with other people about it. I think that's probably more important than followers or likes or any of those things.
What is the best advice you've ever received?
In the context of what we've been talking about, I just actually made a video about this, but my mother-in-law gave me advice before I married my husband when I was like 26. And she told me to never do his laundry because I would learn to hate him. And I said,
I actually watched
yeah.
this video.
And I was like, okay. I was like, that seems a little crazy. Like, I don't mind doing his laundry. What's the big deal? But I think it's not necessarily that, right? It's not don't do his laundry. It's have those conversations, go in eyes open as to kind of what it looks like to be a wife and a partner. I wish I'd kind of heard that and not what she said, right? Like, I think the
Yeah.
advice was there, but the way she said it didn't land at the time. And so I think that would have been advice that I would have done well to heed, but I didn't.
I mean, not doing your partner's laundry is not really practical. Like you're gonna have two separate laundry baskets, the whole thing, right?
We do, but he
Oh,
has
you
dirty
do?
clothes. He's a blue collar guy. His clothes are
Okay.
disgusting. I'm like, don't put
All
your
right.
clothes with my clothes.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, then I guess you could do it.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to your former self?
I would, I'm kind of a doer. I like to get things done. I like to constantly be checking off my boxes. And I think I would probably tell myself to like take a breath for a minute, right? Like, especially as a new parent. I wish I'd just given myself a little bit more grace as opposed to just feeling like I had to power through everything at all
Yeah.
times.
Mhm.
And I still think I need that advice some days.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. When this episode comes out, I believe my daughter will be 9 months old.
Oh,
So, what advice do you have for me as the father of a 9-month-old daughter?
oh my gosh. This is when they're like becoming people, right? Like
Yeah.
they've got personalities, they're fun. She's going to probably start saying words and moving around if she's not already doing it. I
Yeah.
think enjoy it. Take advantage of the time you have now if they're not mobile. I'll definitely say that. Like the second they get mobile, I feel like they just get into everything. Child lock every cabinet you own. That would be another piece of advice. But yeah, I think this is such a fun age. You're going to really, I hope you enjoy it. I enjoy that age a lot. It's just really cool to see them exploring. But I think, yeah, this is the time where you can really enjoy them, but also know that this is when it changes big time. Like this is when they start becoming, they're not babies anymore. They are, right? But they're not. And so you'll see that fast.
Yeah. I appreciate that. No, this has been a really fun age for us, and she's starting to roll around
Uh,
and cover long distances and stuff like that. So
oh, I know.
we're
It's
good.
crazy, right? Like
I
one day
know.
you turn around and they've just moved across the entire room.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Paige, well, this has been a great conversation. Where could people go to connect with you or learn more about you or anything that you'd like to share?
Yeah, you can find me on most social media at She Is a Paige Turner. I also have a website, so you can check me out there. Yeah, and I post quite often, so you'll see my face if you follow along.
All right. Paige Connell, ladies and gentlemen. Paige, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.